The amber warning light flickered across Major Cassandra Wren Thorne's HUD as her F-22 Raptor sliced through the Nevada dawn. 30,000 feet below, the desert stretched like burned paper, but her attention fixed on the radar signature that shouldn't exist. Control had been tracking the unknown aircraft for 6 minutes, long enough to scramble 2 additional Raptors from Nellie's, long enough for someone in Washington to start asking uncomfortable questions. Ghost lead, this is Nellie's tower. Confirm your visual on the bogey. The voice crackled through her headset with that particular brand of controlled tension that meant careers hung in the balance. Cassandra adjusted her helmet, dark eyes scanning the endless blue above the cloud deck. Negative visual tower. Radar contact only. Bearing 270, Angels 32. She paused, watching the blip on her screen execute a turn that defied conventional aerodynamics. Whatever this thing is, it's not following normal flight patterns. 20 miles south, Captain Rick Valdez's F-22 banked hard left, his own sensors painting the same impossible picture. The aircraft moved like liquid mercury across their screens, too smooth, too precise, almost as if it were dancing rather than flying. His wingman, Lieutenant Marcus Chen, had gone silent 3 minutes ago, which wasn't like him. Chen, radio check, Valdez transmitted. Static answered him. Cassandra felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came before something went very wrong. 14 years of flying had taught her to trust that feeling, even when the brass dismissed it as pilot intuition, especially when they dismissed it. The unknown aircraft had appeared on radar at 6:47 hours, moving northeast at impossible speeds before suddenly slowing to what appeared to be a leisurely cruise. No transponder, no radio response, no heat signature that made sense. All call signs, this is control. We have additional radar contacts. Multiple unknowns, various altitudes converging on your position. The words hung in the thin air like ice crystals. Cassandra's gloved fingers found the weapons selector switch, not yet moving it, but needing to know it was there. Below her, Nevada's secret testing grounds held their breath, and somewhere in the electronic maze of NORAD, someone was probably reaching for a very important phone. The bogey on her screen dipped its left wing, a subtle movement that triggered something deep in her memory. She'd seen that exact maneuver before, years ago, in skis that no longer appeared on any official map. The recognition hit her like a physical blow, and suddenly she understood why her hands were shaking. This wasn't first contact. This was a reunion. The radio crackled again, but this time the voice that emerged carried an accent she'd thought she'd never hear again, speaking in a frequency that officially didn't exist. Wren, is that really you flying that beautiful machine? Cassandra's heart stopped. Major Elena Vasquez had been dead for 7 years. Her squadron had vanished over the Arctic during a classified mission that had been scrubbed from every database. The Pentagon had held closed-door funerals and told the families their loved ones died serving their country in ways that couldn't be explained. Elena, the name escaped her lips before training could stop it. Hello, old friend. The voice carried impossible warmth across the cold digital connection. I've been watching you make quite a name for yourself, still flying like you're trying to prove something to the boys. The familiar tease hit Cassandra harder than any missile lock. Elena's squadron, Phantom Wing, had disappeared during Operation Blackout 7, a deep penetration reconnaissance mission into disputed Arctic airspace. 7 F-22s had crossed the polar ice cap and simply vanished from every tracking system on Earth. The official report cited catastrophic weather and equipment failure. The unofficial whispers spoke of experimental Russian technology and electromagnetic anomalies. Cassandra had known Elena since flight school, had been her wingman through 3 deployments, had held her hand in base hospitals after bad landings and worse missions. Elena Vasquez flew like poetry written in jet exhaust, could make an F-22 dance steps that weren't in any manual. She was also the only pilot Cassandra had ever met who could match her in the air. Elena, where have you been? What happened to your squadron? That's complicated. The transmission carried undertones of something Cassandra couldn't identify, not quite sadness, not quite fear. We found something out there, Ren, something that changed everything. On her radar screen, more contacts appeared. 7 aircraft, flying in perfect formation, their signatures exactly matching the lost Phantom wing. Each pilot had been declared dead, their families had grieved, their stories had been classified beyond recognition. Now they flew in formation above the Nevada desert like ghosts made manifest. "Control, are you copying this transmission?" Cassandra asked. "Negative, Ghost Lead. You're coming through broken and unclear. Maintain your heading and report status." Alina's voice returned, private channel, impossible frequency. "They can't hear us, Ren. The technology we encountered. It operates outside their understanding. We're not exactly on their frequency anymore." Cassandra's training warred with her emotions. Protocol demanded she report everything to Control, vector in additional support, treat this as a potential threat. Her heart demanded she protect Alina, demand answers, understand how her closest friend had returned from the dead flying aircraft that shouldn't exist. The F-22s of Phantom Wing moved closer, and Cassandra could see them now, sleek silver shapes that caught the morning light like liquid metal. They flew with impossible precision, each aircraft responding to the others as if controlled by a single mind. But it was more than that. The aircraft themselves looked different, evolved somehow, as if 7 years of absence had transformed both planes and pilots into something entirely new. "Alina, what did you find out there?" "The question isn't what we found, Ren. It's what found us." The lead aircraft of Phantom Wing rolled inverted and dove beneath Cassandra's F-22, the maneuver so close she felt her aircraft shudder in the displaced air. Through her canopy, she caught a glimpse of the pilot inside, Alina's familiar silhouette, but something in her posture suggested changes that went deeper than 7 years of absence could explain. "We need to talk," Alina's voice carried new urgency. "But not here, not where they can monitor. Follow me, Ren, like old times." The 7 aircraft began climbing, ascending through altitudes where conventional aircraft couldn't sustain flight. Cassandra watched her altimeter spin as she followed, her F-22 straining at the edge of its operational envelope. At 60,000 feet, the sky turned deep purple, and still Alina's squadron climbed higher. "Alina, I'm at my ceiling. Where are you taking me?" "To where the answers are." Alina's aircraft continued ascending, somehow maintaining perfect formation despite the impossible altitude. "To where we've been waiting for the right person to find us. We always knew it would be you, Ren. You never could leave a mystery unsolved." Behind her, Cassandra could hear Control growing increasingly agitated. Captain Valdez was requesting instructions, but his voice seemed to fade as if filtered through layers of atmosphere that shouldn't exist. The radio crackled with electromagnetic interference that formed almost musical patterns, and Cassandra realized she was crossing some kind of threshold, not just of altitude, but of understanding. At 70,000 feet, her F-22 should have fallen from the sky. Instead, it flew as smoothly as if supported by invisible hands. The aircraft responded to her controls with impossible grace, and when she looked at her instruments, half of them displayed readings that made no scientific sense. "What's happening to my aircraft?" "The same thing that happened to ours." Alina's formation leveled off at an altitude that didn't appear on any chart. "We're operating under different rules now, Ren. Rules that the people who sent us up here never imagined existed." Through her canopy, Cassandra could see the curve of the earth below and the star-scattered darkness above. At this altitude, the line between sky and space blurred into something that seemed almost alive. The 7 aircraft of Phantom Wing flew in perfect formation around her, their movements synchronized in ways that suggested communication beyond radio frequencies. "Alina, I need you to explain what happened 7 years ago. The families deserve to know. I deserve to know. 7 years ago, we were sent to investigate unusual radar contacts over the Arctic Ocean. High-altitude aircraft operating in patterns that suggested advanced technology, possibly Russian, possibly Chinese. What we found was neither. The story unfolded in fragments as Alina's squadron maintained their impossible altitude. They had encountered aircraft that moved through three-dimensional space as if it were merely a suggestion, piloted by beings whose understanding of physics transcended human knowledge. The contact had been peaceful, Alina explained, but transformative. The pilots of Phantom Wing had been offered a choice: return to Earth with memories erased, or remain and learn. We chose to learn, Alina said, but learning meant leaving everything behind. Our families, our lives, our very understanding of what it means to be human. Cassandra felt the weight of that choice settling over her like a heavy blanket. Alina and her squadron had become something between human and something else, operating aircraft that existed partially in normal space and partially in dimensions that human science couldn't measure. They'd spent 7 years exploring realities that existed beyond Earth's atmosphere, beyond human comprehension. Why didn't you come back? Why didn't you contact anyone? Because we couldn't. The transformation. It changes you, Ren. We're still us, but we're also something more. Something that doesn't quite fit in the world we left behind. The implications crashed over Cassandra like a wave. Alina and her squadron had become explorers of realities beyond human understanding, but the cost had been everything they'd once been. They existed now in the spaces between worlds, neither fully human nor fully alien, ambassadors to mysteries that the human mind could barely comprehend. But you're here now, you came back. We came back because something's coming, Ren. Something that will make our choice look simple by comparison. Alina's aircraft banked closer, and Cassandra could see her friend's face through the canopy, unchanged by 7 years, but somehow deeper, as if she'd seen things that had fundamentally altered her understanding of existence. The entities we encountered, they're not the only ones out there, and not all of them are as patient or as kind as our teachers were. The words carried implications that made Cassandra's hands tremble on her controls. Earth faced a contact scenario that went far beyond anything the military had prepared for, and Alina's squadron represented the only humans who understood the scope of what was coming. What do you need from me? We need you to make the same choice we did. Alina's voice carried both hope and sorrow. We need someone who can bridge the gap between what we've become and what humanity needs to survive. Someone they'll listen to when we try to explain what's coming. Cassandra stared at the impossible formation around her. 7 dead pilots flying aircraft that shouldn't exist at an altitude that should have killed her. Alina's offer hung in the thin air like a promise and a threat combined. Accept, and she would gain knowledge that could save humanity but lose everything that made her human. Refuse, and Earth would face the coming contact unprepared and defenseless. What happens if I say yes? You join us in the space between worlds. You learn to see reality as it actually is, not as human perception limits it. You become something new. And if I say no? You return to your life, your career, your human limitations. And when the others come, you watch humanity struggle against forces they can't comprehend or defeat. The choice crystallized in Cassandra's mind with terrible clarity. Alina and her squadron had made the ultimate sacrifice, their humanity, in service of something larger. Now they asked her to do the same, to become a bridge between worlds that operated under entirely different rules. Below them, Earth turned in its ancient orbit, beautiful and fragile, and utterly unprepared for what was coming. The weight of 7 billion lives pressed against Cassandra's consciousness as she realized that her decision in this moment might determine humanity's survival. I need time to think. Time is what we don't have, Ren. Alina's formation began descending, leading Cassandra back toward altitudes where physics operated according to human understanding. The advanced scouts have already arrived. What you've been tracking these past weeks, the unusual radar contacts, the impossible maneuvers, those are just the beginning. As they descended through the atmosphere, Cassandra's instruments slowly returned to normal readings. The impossible became merely improbable, then settled into the realm of classified encounters that would never appear in official reports. But she carried with her the memory of what she'd seen, the knowledge of what choice awaited her. At 30,000 feet, Alina's squadron began to fade from radar screens, their aircraft becoming transparent against the morning sky. Only Alina's voice remained, carried on frequencies that shouldn't exist. "We'll be watching, Ren. When you're ready to join us, when you're ready to help save the world, call my name to the sky. We'll hear you." The transmission ended, leaving Cassandra alone in the cockpit of her F-22, flying through Nevada airspace as if nothing had happened. Control's voice crackled through her headset, demanding status reports and explanations for her altitude deviations. Captain Valdez requested permission to return to base, his voice carrying the confusion of a pilot who'd lost track of both time and memory. But Cassandra carried the weight of Alina's offer, the knowledge of humanity's approaching crisis, and the terrible responsibility of choosing between her human life and her species' survival. As she banked toward Nellie's Air Force Base, she wondered if she was strong enough to make the sacrifice Alina had made, or if she was too human to save humanity itself. The morning sun painted the cockpit in golden light, and somewhere in the space between Earth and stars, 7 pilots waited for her answer. 3 days later, Cassandra sat in a windowless conference room deep within the Pentagon, facing a panel of generals whose stars reflected fluorescent lighting like tiny metal warnings. The debriefing had lasted 14 hours across 2 sessions, each question designed to probe the edges of what she remembered and what she might be hiding. Colonel Martinez, a weathered man whose eyes suggested he'd heard every possible explanation for aerial phenomena, leaned forward across the polished table. "Major Thorne, let me understand your report. You encountered 7 unidentified aircraft operating at impossible altitudes, engaged in radio communication on frequencies that don't exist, and maintained visual contact for approximately 47 minutes. Yet our radar data shows you flying alone for the entire mission." Cassandra kept her expression neutral, her hands folded precisely in her lap. "Sir, I reported exactly what I observed. The aircraft matched the configuration and flight patterns of F-22 Raptors, but displayed capabilities beyond our current technology." General Patricia Hayes, the only other woman in the room, studied Cassandra with the particular intensity of someone who understood the challenges of being underestimated in military aviation. "Major, in your opinion, was this encounter of foreign origin? Russian? Chinese? Some kind of experimental technology we're not briefed on?" The question hung in the air like a trap. Cassandra could feel the weight of Alina's secret pressing against her consciousness, the knowledge that humanity faced threats that made conventional military concerns seem almost quaint. But Alina's warning echoed in her memory. Some truths were too large for institutions built on human limitations. "The technology I observed exceeded any known capabilities, ma'am. The aircraft movements suggested an understanding of aerodynamics that operates outside conventional physics." Colonel Martinez exchanged glances with his colleagues, a silent communication that spoke of classified knowledge and carefully managed information. "Major Thorne, you have an exemplary service record. 14 years of exemplary performance, multiple commendations, 0 psychological flags. That's why we're trying to understand what might have influenced your perceptions during this encounter." The subtle accusation stung exactly as intended. Cassandra recognized the familiar pattern. When female pilots reported unusual phenomena, the questions invariably turned towards psychological explanations that were rarely applied to their male counterparts. She'd watched other women's careers derailed by encounters with technology that challenged official understanding. "Sir, my perceptions were clear and accurate. I documented everything according to protocol and reported my observations honestly." General Hayes leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "Major, off the record, and I mean completely off the record, have you ever heard of Project Silent Sky?" The name triggered something in Cassandra's memory, a fragment of conversation from her early days at Nellie's. Silent Sky had been whispered about in pilot lounges, described as a black project so classified that asking questions could end careers. Officially, it didn't exist. Unofficially, it dealt with aerial phenomena that couldn't be explained or acknowledged. "No, ma'am, not officially. Silent Sky investigates exactly the kind of encounters you've described. Aircraft operating beyond known capabilities, unexplained radar contacts, technology that suggests non-conventional origins." General Hayes paused, studying Cassandra's reaction. "The project has been active for 37 years, and in that time, we've documented over 400 similar encounters." The revelation shifted something fundamental in Cassandra's understanding. Alina's squadron wasn't unique. They were part of a pattern that stretched back decades, a history of contact and transformation that had been carefully hidden from public knowledge. The military knew about the encounters, had been tracking them, preparing for them. What happened to the other pilots who reported these encounters? Colonel Martinez consulted a file that appeared to contain more information than should exist about her career. Most returned to normal duty with amended reports that reflected more conventional explanations. Some requested transfers to other commands. A few, he paused meaningfully, a few disappeared entirely from our records. The implications settled over Cassandra like cold water. Pilots who encountered the phenomena faced a choice: accept official explanations that erase their experiences, or maintain their accounts and face consequences that ranged from career destruction to something worse. Alina's squadron had simply chosen a third option: disappearing completely rather than living with lies or facing elimination. "Major Thorne," General Hayes continued, "we're offering you a choice. You can amend your report to reflect equipment malfunction and return to normal duty. Your record will remain unmarked. Your career will continue on its current trajectory, and this conversation never happened. Lord. Or you accept assignment to Silent Sky. You join a very small group of pilots who investigate phenomena that officially don't exist. You gain access to information that will change your understanding of reality, but you also accept restrictions that will isolate you from conventional military structure." Cassandra understood the subtext. Silent Sky was either humanity's first line of defense against incomprehensible threats, or a carefully managed way to control pilots who'd seen too much. Either way, accepting the assignment meant leaving behind the life she'd built, the career she'd fought to establish, the simple certainty of operating in a world governed by understood rules. "What kind of restrictions?" General Hayes opened another file, this one stamped with security classifications that Cassandra had never seen before. "Complete communication monitoring, restricted travel, no contact with family or friends outside approved protocols. Your official record would show assignment to classified projects with no details available even to you." The terms matched Alina's description of isolation, the price of knowledge that bridged human and non-human understanding. Silent Sky offered a path toward the truth, but it also offered a kind of death, the death of her identity as Major Cassandra Thorne, respected pilot and human being. "How long do I have to decide?" 24 hours, Colonel Martinez said. "After that, we'll need your amended report or your acceptance of Silent Sky assignment." The meeting ended with handshakes that felt like farewells. Cassandra walked through Pentagon corridors lined with portraits of military leaders who'd faced their own impossible choices. wondering if any of them had grappled with decisions that affected the survival of humanity itself. The weight of Alina's knowledge pressed against her consciousness, the understanding that conventional military responses would prove inadequate against the forces gathering beyond Earth's atmosphere. That evening, alone in her temporary quarters, Cassandra stood by her window watching aircraft navigation lights trace patterns across the Washington night sky. Each light represented pilots following established procedures, operating within understood parameters, living lives bounded by human limitations. She envied their certainty even as she recognized its fragility. Her secure phone buzzed with a message from her sister in Colorado, a simple check-in that carried the warmth of normal human connection. Reading it, Cassandra realized that accepting Silent Sky meant cutting ties with everything that anchored her to conventional life. Her nieces would grow up wondering why Aunt Cass had stopped visiting. Her parents would receive carefully crafted explanations that revealed nothing, while confirming their daughter had disappeared into the government's black operations. But Alina's warning echoed in her memory. Something was coming that would make personal sacrifices seem trivial by comparison. Humanity faced contact with intelligences that operated beyond human comprehension, and the choice was between preparation and catastrophic surprise. Cassandra opened her laptop and began typing two different reports. The first followed traditional military format, describing equipment malfunction and misidentified conventional aircraft. It would preserve her career, maintain her connections, allow her to continue living as Major Cassandra Wren Thorne, respected pilot and normal human being. The second report detailed everything: Alina's return, the impossible aircraft, the choice offered between human limitation and transcendent understanding. It read like science fiction, like the fantasies of a pilot who'd cracked under pressure. But it was also true, and submitting it meant accepting assignment to Silent Sky with all its implications. At midnight, she made her choice. The next morning, General Hayes received Cassandra's decision along with her unedited report. Reading it, she recognized the courage required to choose truth over comfort, preparation over denial. Silent Sky had gained another pilot willing to sacrifice personal identity for humanity's protection. But as Cassandra signed the papers that would erase her previous life, she wondered if Alina's path offered something beyond even Silent Sky's understanding, a transformation that transcended the limitations of both human and military perspectives. The choice Alina had offered still waited in the space between Earth and stars, and Cassandra suspected her journey toward that decision had only begun. 6 months later, Captain Cassandra Thorne, her rank adjusted to reflect her new assignment's requirements, stood in a hangar that didn't appear on any base schematic, studying an aircraft that challenged everything she thought she understood about flight. The craft's lines seemed to flow like liquid metal frozen in the moment of perfect aerodynamic expression, its surface reflecting light in patterns that hurt to look at directly. "Beautiful, isn't she?" Dr. Michael Petrov emerged from the aircraft's shadow, his Russian accent carrying the enthusiasm of a scientist who'd found his life's work in technologies that shouldn't exist. "We built her using principles recovered from crash sites dating back to 1947. Took us 73 years to understand even the basic concepts." Cassandra walked around the aircraft slowly, noting details that seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at them. The craft was roughly the size of an F-22, but its proportions suggested design principles that prioritized function over human aesthetic preferences. No visible weapon systems, no obvious propulsion mechanism, no clear distinction between wing and fuselage. "How does it fly?" Dr. Petrov smiled with the satisfaction of someone about to reveal a closely guarded secret. "It doesn't fly. It convinces local spacetime that it belongs somewhere else, and reality obligingly moves it there. The pilot doesn't control the aircraft so much as negotiate with it." The explanation should have sounded like fantasy, but Cassandra's encounter with Alina had prepared her for technologies that operated outside conventional understanding. Silent Sky had shown her crashed vehicles recovered from sites across 7 decades, their materials and design principles gradually yielding secrets to human investigation. This aircraft represented the culmination of that research, humanity's first attempt to build a vehicle using truly alien principles. What's it called? Officially, Test Vehicle 77 Bravo. Unofficially, the pilots call her Translator. She's designed to operate in the boundary spaces where normal physics gives way to something more flexible. Cassandra studied the cockpit, visible through a canopy that seemed to be made from crystallized air. The interior displays showed symbols that resembled mathematical equations written in languages that predated human civilization. Everything about the aircraft suggested consciousness rather than mere machinery. Have you flown her? Dr. Petrov's expression grew complicated. We've had 6 test pilots attempt flights over the past 2 years. 3 returned after brief hops that never exceeded 1,000 feet. 2 reported successful flights but couldn't remember anything about the experience. 1, he paused. 1 pilot reported contact with the original designers. She claimed they offered her the same choice your friend Alina described. What did she choose? She chose to join them. Lieutenant Sarah Chen disappeared during her final test flight, but ground control tracked her ascending to altitudes that should have been impossible. Her last transmission matched the frequency patterns you documented in your encounter with Phantom Wing. The implications crystallized in Cassandra's understanding. The Translator wasn't just an experimental aircraft. It was humanity's attempt to build a bridge toward the same transformation Alina had undergone. Each test flight risked losing another pilot to the space between worlds, but it also offered the possibility of contact with intelligences that could guide humanity through the coming crisis. Why am I here? Dr. Petrov gestured toward the aircraft with something approaching reverence. Because you're the only pilot who's made contact and returned with both memory and stability intact. The Translator has been waiting for someone who could communicate with both human controllers and alien consciousness. We think you might be able to fly her without losing yourself in the process. Cassandra approached the aircraft's boarding ladder, her hands running along surfaces that felt warm despite the hangar's chill. The metal seemed to pulse under her touch, responding to her presence in ways that suggested awareness. This was more than technology. It was a living interface between human limitation and cosmic possibility. What's the mission? Contact. The radar signatures you encountered 6 months ago have been increasing in frequency. We're detecting approach patterns that suggest multiple intelligences converging on Earth's location. Some appear benevolent, like the entities your friend Alina encountered. Others, Dr. Petrov's expression darkened. Others show behavior patterns that concern our analysts. The revelation confirmed Alina's warnings. Earth faced contact scenarios that ranged from enlightening to catastrophic, and humanity's response would depend on understanding motivations and capabilities that transcended human experience. The Translator offered a way to meet these intelligences on something approaching equal terms. When do we begin? The question isn't when, Dr. Petrov said. It's whether you're prepared for a flight that might change you as fundamentally as it changed Alina and her squadron. The Translator responds to consciousness as much as controls. Flying her means opening your mind to perspectives that could transform your understanding of what it means to be human. Cassandra looked up at the aircraft's nose, studying inscriptions that seemed to shift between human symbols and something far older. The choice Alina had offered still waited in the space between Earth and stars, but now humanity had built its own path toward that decision. The Translator represented both opportunity and risk, a chance to meet the coming contact as equals rather than victims. Dr. Petrov, if I fly this aircraft and make contact, what guarantees do I have that I'll return unchanged? None whatsoever. His honesty carried the weight of scientific integrity. But if you don't fly her, what guarantees do any of us have that humanity will survive what's coming? The choice crystallized with the clarity that comes from accepting responsibility for consequences beyond personal preference. Alina had chosen transformation to gain the knowledge needed to protect humanity. Now Cassandra faced the same decision, but with an aircraft built by human hands using principles learned through decades of careful investigation. She climbed into the translator's cockpit, her hands finding controls that seemed to adjust to her grip. The displays came alive with symbols that her training couldn't interpret but her intuition somehow understood. The aircraft's consciousness touched her mind gently, asking permission rather than demanding submission. "Translator to control," she transmitted, requesting permission for initial test flight. Dr. Petrov's voice crackled through the headset. "Permission granted, translator. Take her as high as she wants to go." The aircraft lifted from the hangar floor without sound or vibration, rising through altitude in ways that bypassed conventional aerodynamics. At 10,000 feet, Cassandra felt the edge of normal physics beginning to blur. At 30,000 feet, the boundary between her consciousness and the aircraft's began to dissolve. At 60,000 feet, she understood why previous pilots had either forgotten their flights or chosen never to return. The translator didn't just fly through space, it flew through possibility itself. At 70,000 feet, Cassandra could see patterns of intelligence moving through dimensions that human perception couldn't normally access. Some patterns felt familiar, carrying the signature of Alina's consciousness, evolved beyond human limitation. Others felt alien but benevolent, vast minds focused on teaching and protection. But threading through the benevolent patterns, she detected something else: intelligences that moved with predatory precision, consciousness that viewed Earth not as a contact opportunity, but as a resource to be harvested. Alina's warnings crystallized into immediate threat assessment as Cassandra realized that humanity's choice was no longer between contact and isolation. The choice was between evolution and extinction. At 80,000 feet, the translator's consciousness merged completely with her own, and Cassandra understood what Alina had tried to explain. The transformation wasn't loss of humanity. It was expansion beyond the limitations that made humans vulnerable to intelligences that operated on cosmic scales. She could return to Earth unchanged and watch humanity struggle against forces beyond their comprehension. Or she could accept the expansion and become something capable of protecting the world she'd sworn to defend. "Alina, are you out there?" The response came not through radio but through direct consciousness transfer. Alina's presence touched her mind with the warmth of reunion and the weight of shared responsibility. "I've been waiting for you, Ren. We all have." Around them, the transformed pilots of Phantom Wing materialized in aircraft that existed partially in normal space and partially in dimensions where thought became reality. Alina's F-22 flew alongside the translator, its pilot visible through a canopy that revealed features both familiar and evolved. "The others are coming," Alina's consciousness communicated directly. "The benevolent teachers who offered us this gift, but also the harvesters who see Earth as another resource to be consumed. Humanity has perhaps 6 months before first contact becomes unavoidable." Cassandra felt the weight of species survival settling over her expanded consciousness. The choice was no longer personal, it was evolutionary. Remain human and watch humanity face threats they couldn't comprehend, or transform and gain the capabilities needed to protect everything she'd ever loved. Through the translator's consciousness, she could see Earth turning below, beautiful, fragile, completely unprepared for contact with intelligences that measured time in geological epochs and viewed solar systems as temporary curiosities. 7 billion lives depended on decisions made by people who had no understanding of what was coming. "What do you need from me?" Alina's aircraft moved closer, two pilots who'd followed different paths toward the same impossible choice. We need you to become our bridge to humanity. They'll listen to you in ways they couldn't listen to us. We need you to help prepare them for contact. And if I choose transformation, then you join us in protecting Earth from threats that human military force can't address. You become part of the defense system that stands between humanity and extinction. The choice hung in the space between worlds like a star waiting to be born. Accept transformation and gain the power to protect humanity at the cost of her human identity. Refuse transformation and return to Earth knowing that she'd chosen personal comfort over species survival. At 90,000 feet, where Earth's atmosphere gave way to the cosmic dark, Cassandra made her decision. The translator's consciousness embraced her choice. Alina's presence welcomed her transformation, and somewhere far below, humanity continued its ancient patterns while forces beyond imagination moved through the spaces between stars. The pilot who descended from that altitude was still Cassandra Thorne, but she was also something more, a bridge between human limitation and cosmic possibility, a guardian transformed by necessity into something capable of protecting everything she'd chosen to leave behind. Dr. Petrov watched the translator settle onto the hangar floor with movements that seemed to bypass gravity entirely. When the canopy opened, the pilot who emerged carried herself with the same military bearing as Major Cassandra Thorne, but her eyes held depths that suggested she'd seen the universe from perspectives that transformed understanding itself. "How do you feel?" he asked. Cassandra considered the question carefully, testing her transformed consciousness against the remembered limitations of human perception. Different, enhanced, still me, but capable of seeing patterns that were always there but invisible to normal awareness. "Are you still human?" "I'm what humanity needs to become to survive what's coming." She looked at the translator with something approaching affection. "Dr. Petrov, we need to accelerate the program. Earth has 6 months before contact becomes unavoidable, and we need more pilots capable of operating in expanded reality." The urgency in her voice carried weight that purely human concern couldn't convey. Dr. Petrov realized that the patient, careful approach Silent Sky had followed for decades would prove inadequate for the timeline they now faced. Humanity needed to evolve its defensive capabilities faster than natural development could provide. "What do you recommend?" Cassandra's transformed perception allowed her to see possibilities that purely human intelligence couldn't access. "We need to identify pilots whose consciousness is flexible enough to accept transformation without losing stability. Military personnel who have already demonstrated courage in facing the unknown. Like yourself. Like Alina and her squadron. Like the pilots who have reported unusual encounters and been transferred to Silent Sky rather than accepting official explanations." Cassandra paused, her enhanced awareness processing implications that spanned years of careful military cover-ups. "We need to contact everyone who's ever seen something that challenged official reality and offer them the same choice Alina offered me." The plan crystallized in Dr. Petrov's understanding. Rather than hiding the encounters and managing the witnesses, Silent Sky would become a recruitment program for humanity's first line of defense against cosmic threats. The pilots who'd seen beyond normal limitations would become the guardians who protected human civilization from forces it couldn't comprehend. "How many pilots do you estimate we'll need?" Cassandra's consciousness touched the network of intelligence that existed in the spaces between worlds, consulting with Alina and the expanded awareness of Phantom Wing. Alina's group encountered one faction of cosmic intelligence. My flight in the translator revealed at least 7 distinct groups approaching Earth's location. Some peaceful, some neutral, some actively hostile. 7 groups. The teachers who offered Alina transformation, the observers who,